Welcome to A Moment of Bach, and welcome back to our mini-series on Brandenburg Concerto No. 1. In this podcast, we take our favorite moments from Bach's vast musical output, just a minute's worth, or even a few seconds, and we show you why we find those moments remarkable. A couple weeks ago, we started our annual tradition of doing a small series on one of the Brandenburg concertos. This year, it's number 1 in a recently released video by the Netherlands Bach Society, where we get our excellent recordings from. And we've looked at the opening movement with its glorious horns, and we've looked at the second movement, completely contrasting Adagio. And now it's time for movement number 3, marked Allegro in Bach's score. Christian, are you familiar with the rule of 3? Is that there just should be 3 of things? That's exactly it. It's really that simple. Yeah. Sure. I mean, it's a storytelling principle. Joke telling. Yeah, it's always satisfying if a story has a good setup and a little bit of interest in the middle and then a punchline, let's say. Or, a lot of times the third thing in a list is a punchline. There's also the 3 little pigs and the 3 bears, the Goldilocks and the 3 bears story, and all of those classic examples. Yeah. It's an important number. It is. It's one of the first ones. It's one of the best ones too. Why is that? Well, Bach would have certainly seen the religious value of numerology. We know that he was interested in numerology for sure. And the most obvious thing here is the Trinity, which is God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit. This work we're looking at today, Brandenburg Concerto No. 1, Movement 3, is not a religious work, not a sacred work. And the reason I bring up the rule of 3 here, even though I really could have brought it up any time talking about Bach, there just are a lot of good examples here in the musical phrasing and in a wider structure, which we'll get to in a second. But first, let's just look at the intro and listen to what happens in the first 4 measures. I think this is obviously pretty subjective, but I think the rule of 3 is already at play here. We have a first motive, da-da-da-da-da-da, if you listen to the horn specifically. A second, very similar one, moved up higher, da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And then a third, longer one, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. I hear that as a third motive, but it's subjective. That could be considered 4 different things. That could be considered 3 da-da-da-da-da-da-da, 4 da-da-da-da-da. But to me, I think the rule of 3 is applying here. And we also hear it again if we listen to the violins and oboes. We hear bum 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 ba da 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 da. 3 of those with a little finisher at the end of the third one. That's a little bit extra. But just like in the rule of 3 in storytelling, the third one is the punchline, sort of, or the finisher, and it should be a little bit more interesting or close out in some way. We then get another little group of 3 from the violins and oboes. Ooh, and this one is actually 3 parts of equal length. Yeah, there's 3 bars. The 3 there. This, by the way, Alex, I think is where Bach's numerology and his Baroque style exceeds that of what he could have done if he had lived like 100 years later or 60 years later, because it's less likely that Haydn or Mozart would have used a phrase unit that worked out to 3 when 4 is much more conclusive, I guess. And it's more even, yeah. Yeah, 4 is, everything is 4 in music. Yeah, everything's 4. That's normal. Right. Groups of 4 measures are very common in musical phrases. And just the time signature, which is the feel of the meter. I mean, nowadays, popular music, it's got to be 98% of it is in 4/4 time. And in this style, in the Baroque era, we would see a pretty wide assortment. Not everything is in 4/4 in this era. Here, a third movement, this is 6/8 time. which is a compound meter. So each of the smaller beats, dun 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 dun, we have groups of 3. And here, when the horns reappear in measure 8, we can hear the switching off, the handing off of this 1 2 3 1 2 3 figure. It is in the strings and oboes in the first beat. It's in the horns in the second beat. So it goes string, string, strings, horns, 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 string, string, strings, horns, like that. Well, that's interesting. That's interesting that you are describing it almost backwards as what I would have thought. Just by looking at the page, I mean, I know how it sounds, but it looks like the material, like the motivic material, is the faster notes, because in the first 7 measures, we've discussed how the 16th notes are the, let's just call it melody. And here, you're talking about the 8th notes, which are static. Right, but I'm drawn to that group of 3. You're right, but you're right. Yeah, it is. It's very foreground in a way that most just like 3 repeated 8th notes are not. Right. You can also always be listening to the bass, and here, because it's a compound meter of 1 2 3 1 2 3, Bach is able to hit downbeats on low notes, bum 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 bum, and so that those upbeats can be filling out the chords a little more. This way he keeps the texture like really thick. Then, at the end of the first cadence here, which if you were following along in the score is measure 16 into measure 17, he finally lands. And what does he give us on measure 16 in the cadence? Well, it's another way of getting the number 3 in there. He gives us within the 1 2 3 1 2 3 structure, he gives us what's called a hemiola, which is a temporary rearrangement of the strong beats, and then we get 1 2 1 2 1 2. So it feels like 3 bigger beats. 1 2 3. These devices were very common in this era, and George Frederick Handel uses them probably more than any other composer in this era, at least more obviously, I think, in his works. But here we see a strong one right here. 1 2 3 and 1. So not only is that hemiola a group of 3, but it's actually the third measure that feels like it wraps up the cadence. There's actually 3 measures that feel like they could all be the end of this cadence, but he extends it. Do you hear what I mean there? It's like, this feels like it could wrap up here. F. And then here's the hemiola. F. F. Finally, we just landed on the real one. So there are 3 here instead of just 1. Like, it basically feels like it lands on F 3 times. And that's the end of the introductory material. And then we get, finally, the concerto stuff. Because really, this is a concerto grosso. We've talked before about what that means. It means there's a concerto, not just one instrument that's a fancy instrument that has the fancy material, but typically a group of instruments. And in this movement, the instrument here is the violino piccolo, which is like a small violin. And you're hearing it now in a solo setting with some bass accompaniment. But the other group of instruments that switch off the role of concertino are the horns. They have a lot of the important material in this work. And so, Christian, it's interesting that you mentioned that Haydn and Mozart might not have stuck with something in groups of 3 as much, because what is considered a very important innovation in terms of musical form in the era of Haydn and Mozart, particularly in the first movement of their works.
Are you talking about sonata form?
Sonata form, yes. And sonata form is usually characterized as starting in that era, which is after Bach. But I mean, obviously these things are all part of a continuum. It's not like sonata form came out of nowhere. And in this movement, it just basically is sonata form. I don't know how you could argue against it. I mean, it's an early version of it. Right, but sonata form in general is a 3-part structure of a first movement, typically, of a work, but not always the first movement. A lot of times it could also be used in the final movement. And the bare bones of it are 3 things: exposition, development, and recapitulation. Now, if it was just that simple, you could basically say everything that's not binary form is this, and that's not true. There's more to sonata form, but the other aspects of sonata form are still present here. We've got an opening section in a tonic key. That's the key of F. And then here, after the concerto material starts, we wrap up a cadence in C, which is the dominant. We get to this cadence by hearing these pedal point Gs.
So in this sonata form theory you have here, what's the exposition of the first theme? Because sonata form is defined by two contrasting themes. Is this all introductory material?
Yeah,
and
so
then
that's the intro, and then when the violin comes in here, the concerto material, that would be our first theme there.
Although it,
I guess the fact that
but it's the same
theme in the dominant key is the same theme is really what makes this not like the sonata form of the classical era, right? Is that what you're saying?
Well, and also the beginning of the solo violin, the solo piccolo violin, is the same motive as the introduction, as what we would be calling the introduction.
Right, because it's just an intro.
Yeah, but it's usually in sonata form. It's usually not the same.
Yeah, in sonata form, the intro is something different. Yeah, that's true.
But if you're talking about key relationships, then yeah, the development of sonata form, I mean, it does come from this. I don't think it's quite there yet. It comes from the key relationship of different sections of music, starting in the home key and then in the secondary key. But does this have some sort of recapitulation with both themes back in the original key? One of them moved to the original? Okay, where's the second theme?
But that's what I'm saying. That the difference is that it really is only one theme, or like 3 or 4 different motives that he throws together to form one theme. That's much more of Bach's style, right? He puts these smaller building blocks together. They all explode like right out the chute at the beginning. And you kind of have everything you need right away. That is a major difference between this style and the later styles, right?
Yeah. I don't want to say there's clear division between the sections later in classical music. There is if you analyze, but they might be continuous like musically, but there is a pattern that does emerge where composers try to fit 2 completely contrasting affects or moods into the single movement, and that is what's new and does not happen so frequently, almost ever actually, in Baroque music. There's usually a full stop before a new movement in Baroque music for a different feel, like we heard last week.
Yeah, that's true. And the retransition, yeah.
Oh, retransition.
Yeah.
And then the dramatic double return at the end.
The retransition, yeah, and all that. But there is, and this is why I kept thinking of sonata form in this movement, is there is this, of course, the development where he goes to a little bit more interesting places key-wise, just like you'd expect. In fact, Bach's development sections are many times a lot more harmonically complex than this. In this, he just lives in A minor for a little bit during this section. And then here we feel like he's introducing more flats, and now it's feeling like the subdominant, which is B flat. And then, right before we get to a recap, he does hit the brakes on us and add 2 measures of adagio. Those 2 measures take quite a while because of the slow tempo. And it's right there on the pickup into the fast tempo again that we finally get back to our key, F major. We're hearing that concerto instrument again, violino piccolo. And then we're back in on the quiet horns here. So we're not quite back into like full-fledged final statement of the theme yet. That's coming soon. Here comes the ramping up of the bass. And then here's that pedal point again. Instead of being a G this time to lead to a dominant of C, this is a C, which is going to lead to the tonic, which is F. It's going to take a little while to get there, though. And on the way up, we get finally this great soaring horn line with a trill on a high C. love that moment. That's my favorite moment. That's the moment for me today.
It's interesting. It's interesting metrically there. When it goes to F, it's all half a bar off there.
It is. It's like he's not ready to give it to us fully yet and then he does. Just a few seconds later, he gives it to us on the downbeat. But they wait. The Netherlands Bach Society chooses to not give us the full forte yet. They're going to save that.
It's a brilliant, written out, orchestrated crescendo.
Yeah.
Coming from a time period in music history where you did not write in the score like pianissimo and then like little hairpin crescendos to mezzo piano, and then 8 bars later like a little thing that says crescendo poco a poco, and then 8 bars later some slowly written out dynamics. But that's not...
Oh yeah, they were never that fussy with the dynamic markings.
In fact, the fact that he put piano back at near the beginning of this recapitulation when all the instruments do come in is saying that he was actually having more of an eye toward this than a lot of his contemporaries maybe did. The use of the Italian markings piano meaning soft and forte meaning loud was already happening. I'm not saying it wasn't, but nowadays you have such fussiness between different shades of loud and soft. But Bach here achieves it all with one piano marking on these ripieno instruments, and then a written out, more of an orchestration of adding the instruments in and building that tension harmonically, like as you're saying, Alex, and in a sort of precursor to sonata form, getting us back into the original key finally, and hearing this material that once brought us somewhere more distant now brings us home instead. It's the same material.
Right. I like how you characterize that, because orchestration is dynamics for Bach. That's how he would have thought of it in this time period. This was like a big ensemble here for the time, and knowing how all these instruments sing in their correct range, what range is the sort of money range for each instrument, and where to bring them so that they can be brought out the most dynamically, while also building energy harmonically upward and upward and upward to get to this great moment. In the last page of music here, you can hear that the instrumentalists are so excited as the music soars here. They actually speed up just a little bit tempo right here. It's hard not to. The excitement just builds. And then here again, we have that triple cadence. It's like he could have just done one, but he has 3. He lands on F 3 times.
It's funny, in the manuscript, it's a da capo, just because those last like 16 bars or so are the same as the first, but only the last few measures. It's still like above board. He doesn't repeat the entire beginning section. It's not like ABA.
Right, it's just the intro. Yeah.
Yeah. Looking at this manuscript, it's more clear to me now why everything is offset by one half beat like that. And then it lines up, because it doesn't have to line up until it goes back. And interestingly, I don't think there's any forte markings.
Yeah, no, there aren't. I noticed that too. You would just have to assume where they belong, right?
Yeah.
When you go back to that recap of the first material, it's got to be forte.
Yeah, it doesn't even say F there like he wrote P in the other spot. I think you would just know as the performer.
In the manuscript, does the last note have a fermata on it? But it's an 8th note? It's like a short note with a fermata?
Yes.
Because that's what... Yeah. So that's also an interesting choice, because he's clearly saying this is supposed to be a short note, but it is final, so not quite as short.
You could argue that it's only an 8th note because in his manuscript it's an 8th note, but it only is because there's more notes right after it. There's another 8th note right after, because you're supposed to just end there, because you're reading the music the second time.
Oh, I see. Yes, because the da capo.
So you could argue that note should be long, because the only reason it's written short is because of the da capo. But I don't know.
I mean, I think in music of this era, you're supposed to interpret it, like you're supposed to hold it because it's the final note. And then you get to decide if it should be a little bit of a shorter final note, and they keep it pretty short in this recording. I like that. There's the customary pause before the final note, and then that short final note. It's a really neat effect.
Mm-hmm.
Really love that little pause. It's a very Baroque thing. You don't hear that in a lot of other musical traditions or eras. The little pause before the final note. So listener, I encourage you to listen to this movement, thinking about that rule of 3. Try and find little groups of 3 pieces of musical material, 3 beats, 3 cadence extensions.
3 is a satisfying musical number because I think 2 and its multiples are so even and sound so even. They sound as mathematically square and perfect, and that makes them rather boring and dull. And so when something is in 3, when something is a group of 3 instead of 4, or instead of 2, but especially instead of 4, that's just, even though it's such an ordinary number, it's mathematically more interesting because of the evenness of 2 and 4 and 8 and 16.
Yes, and it also just it has a beginning, middle, and end. That's what a group of 3 symbolizes.
And now here is Alex's moment, the horn trill in the recapitulation. If this episode of A Moment of Bach has piqued your interest in the rest of Brandenburg Concerto No. 1, please see 2 episodes that came out in the last 2 weeks. And we'll keep doing more because there's another movement left, and it's a grand minuet with a bunch of different parts that we'll explore. And if you are a fan of the number 3 and you can't get enough 3 in your life, you should take a look at our past episodes on Brandenburg Concerto number 3. And
that's actually the first one we did. That was back in season 1. Yeah.
The 3-ness is taken kind of to an extreme in Brandenburg Concerto number 3.
Until next time, and the time after that, and all the rest, enjoy those moments.